I think sometimes we think that in that publication there will be some sort of validation, or that in that publication it'll mean something more about you or perhaps your work than is true before you have the book. You already have all the stuff. You're already the person. Whatever dreams you have, whatever it is that you're striving toward, working toward, yes, of course, you should probably keep doing that. But you should also know that you are your own success.
Rosa Castellano is a poet and teacher originally from Tampa, Florida, and now living in Richmond, Virginia. A finalist for Cave Canem Starshine and Clay Fellowship and co-founder of the Richmond Poetry Fest, her work can be found or is forthcoming from Rhino Poetry, Diode, Passages North, Nimrod, Ninth Letter, and Poetry Northwest, among others. She is the author of All Is a Telling, out now from Diode Editions.
You just launched a book and you did it at a poetry festival. Tell me how that was.
Well, it was crazy, and I don't know if I totally recommend it. Like, only because I helped run the poetry festival, and it just made for a really crazy busy week, and like I told my team, I was like, we're gonna have liquid IVs, like, because it was like our festival is 2 days, and then my launch was the Thursday, and then the festival's Friday and Saturday, and so it was just a lot. And also, I wanted to do a 1 day choir, which when you get to have your book launch party, you can kind of do whatever you want, like, and I'm really into community building and also singing, and so that added another day, so that meant like 4 days in a row of stuff, which is a lot to try to get people to come out for all of those things, and I'd say that's maybe the only sort of challenge. Otherwise, it's just fun, like it makes you feel like, look at us, we have poetry all the time, even if it's just this 1 week in April, which it's not, but it feels like that sometimes.
And this is specifically the Richmond Poetry Festival, right?
Yeah, it's our third year. So it happens at the Visual Arts Center in Richmond, and the Visual Arts Center is kind of what its name suggests, which is a place where folks in the community can come and take art classes. But they also have like a really vibrant and dynamic writing program. Like, because they've been around for, they're going to be mad at me, but I think it's like 60 years or something, like a really long time. So they're really a very established organization, and they started a residency for emerging writers. And I was the first one back in 2019. And I kind of have just hung around, like they have a real culture of yes. So when we started, I guess, in like 21 or 22. I don't actually know what our first year was. I'm bad at math, so I'm also bad at numbers, We just felt like there wasn't a place or an opportunity for poets from Richmond to gather and get together and sort of both celebrate the community that we've been building and also poetry. And a key component is giving like as many people as we possibly can a chance at the microphone. And so we have a community reading that happens all day. This past year we had 45 folks read, and it's, established poets reading alongside folks maybe who are reading for the first time. And it's really that sort of like, you never know who's going to stand up. We have slam poets, we have like professional storytellers come through, teenagers, it's pretty fun. Yeah, and it kind of matches the vibe of our city, which is like, I don't know, I guess lots of cities love a festival, but Richmond definitely loves a festival. And, there's also vendors. And this year we had 11 free workshops, which is pretty awesome. And those were all full. What else do we do? Oh, and then we have like featured poets. And so, yeah, this was our first year getting a grant. And now that, it's been 2 weeks, it's time to start like looking for funding and trying to think about what we can do. But we always feature our local community groups, the local slam team, which is filled with slam champions, like closed out our festival and they were fantastic. And it's just really a great way for folks to come together, but also to have an experience with poetry, which sometimes can feel inaccessible, the way that art is, it happens in museums, or poetry happens in, often they happen in galleries, like there's lots of readings in galleries or bookstores. And we just wanted to give people a chance, just a chance, and with so many different kinds of things happening, I don't want to say it's guaranteed that people are going to walk away with something. And it's not like those of us who work on organizing it, we're not trying to, decide what people get to walk away with. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is to just put everything out on the table and hope that they get something good and then come back next year or come throughout the year, and come to readings and classes and all the stuff.
What would you say is the most surprising thing you've learned in like the service of this role?
People want to be heard, I think. And I don't necessarily mean they want to read their poems. I think sometimes you can write a poem with the same goal of being heard as, doing the speaking it out loud. This world that we live in is so crazy, like we're doing all the stuff, most of us, that we do every day while like simultaneously, creating a packing list for the apocalypse. And it feels sort of more important than ever to give people as many tools as possible. And I think that poetry is a tool, not just for individual survival, but for keeping the things that we care about the most, both safe and healthy. And I think the surprising part is that it can be this like sort of fun, I'm going to use the word party, and still be this thing that does immense amounts of good. I think sometimes, I don't know, I feel like, oh, like I should be like toiling like in a hot kitchen, making meals, or like Habitat for Humanity, that there's a physical labor component that's required. Do you know what I mean? When sometimes just creating opportunities for folks is, I don't know if I'm allowed to say it's just as valuable, but it feels just as valuable. Yeah.
Absolutely. And since you bring up the apocalypse, as a poet and a Poetry Fest founder / organizer, what do you think the role of poetry is in 2025 America?
Ooh, well, okay. Like, I mean, everybody's different, and every people, are going to do what they want. But for me personally, I subscribe to that idea that community is how we survive. Every now and again, my husband will have like a moment of panic. Like, what do we do? We should get guns or something, and it's like, no, we need people. Like when you really sit down and think about like whatever your imagined scenario, like if you got a Hunger Games or you're thinking it's going to look like The Road, whatever the scenario is, you need people. You need somebody who knows how to stop a wound from bleeding, or like what can be compostable and what can't be. And creating a community in the short term, when we're not in a dystopian thing, but like as a way of helping all of us survive just our day-to-day lives, even if it wasn't the apocalypse, right? Both as a way of processing. Poems give us that. They give us a space to put the things we need to work on in order to figure out, I always feel so cheesy, but to figure out our healing, like how we do it again tomorrow. But then they also allow us to be connected to each other. And poets, people do not think of us enough. And again, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I myself, and I know tons of people who are in fact poets who are ready to be of service to their communities, like organizers. If those folks don't need to process, I don't know who does, right? Like there's so many things that we have to offer, actually, that we do in our workshops for folks who just want to write, that actually are and can be of service as change making, as community building, as a place. If poems can help us hold what needs to be held, then now also poets are a space for holding anger and joy and all of the stuff. So I feel like call your local poets. Like when you need help, like this is partially why we're here.
Let's dig into your background some. Tell me about your educational background and how you got your start in poetry.
I think, like lots of young readers, I was just a reader. I'm not very athletic, like all of my hobbies involve sitting down. Like I like board games and comic books and all that stuff. And so I read a lot as a young person, and found my way from like scribbling fiction to writing poems, and ended up doing an MFA as a young person, but then I was a little lost after my MFA, because I'm older, like emphasis on the OLD part of older, you know. And so my MFA happened in a time where there were no faculty of color in my department. I was the only person of color in my cohort. There were no women. We had like guest lecturers come in who were women. And so there was a lot there was a lot to kind of recover from in terms of like finding my voice back or my identity, or thinking about what it means to be a writer outside of this little academic bubble that I was in for those 3 years. Plus, my husband and I had it sort of backwards. Like, I finished my degree first, and then he was in dental school. Like, it would have been better if we had figured that out ahead of time. But, anyways, so then I went right to work and then ended up having a bunch of babies and taking a long break from writing, because for me, having babies like made all my brains fall out. Like, that's how it felt. Like it's just like literally like a stream of like stuff from inside my head coming out. And then I did other creative things that I had the bandwidth for. But when my youngest, maybe right around the time he turned 2, I started writing again. And it was really fun. It was so fun. To do this work, like to take, I mean, you're nodding also because you're a poet. But yeah, it's kind of magic, to have this space that we can turn to, not just like in a diary or a reflection back of, who I am, but which is also sort of valuable, especially in the early days of parenting, when your body is all out of whack and your emotions are a little out of whack. And we don't have models. We don't value motherhood the way that we should. What is labor? There's all these questions. And then you have this page in front of you that is, like both welcoming and just totally safe. I think we don't like, there's a lot of talk about what the blank page can do for folks, but I think just the fact that it's safe, that you can scream on a page when you can't scream to your partner or your child. And so anyways, yes, it was super great to get back to writing, and then to then just start building community around it. And it felt really good. And I ended up back in Richmond where I did my MFA. And the scene in Richmond is really actually fantastic. Like I don't know. It's just fantastic. There's lots of cool people doing lots of cool things. Like so many reading series that are exciting and different. I have a friend that runs a variety show. And so there's like this wonderful intersection of music and art. And then every time it ends with burlesque. And so they're pulling in these audiences who maybe would not come to a poetry reading or maybe would not go to a burlesque. And yet we're all in this room together, and being in the room together is when the magic happens. And that's not the only one. There's like 3 or 4 folks somebody's doing something called parallel listening, where they're actually the poet that came for Poetry Fest is Jerome Ellis, and his work is fantastic. And sorry, wrote scores for their poems inside the book. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's poem, 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 and then like the staff and music notes. And so the series, musicians write scores or ambient music for poems that they're given ahead of time, and then they do this big performance. Anyways, it's that kind of exciting stuff that's happening, and it just kind of makes space for everyone too, which is kind of awesome.
That sounds really ideal. How long have you been there?
We moved back to Richmond in 2018, so right before the pandemic. Yeah, and it was really kismet because I had been homeschooling my kids in Vermont, and they were all old enough to go to school. I had like a 5th grader, a 4th grader, a second grader and a kindergartner, and they all went to school, and I took that year to write. And then I got the residency at Viz Arts, and it just really felt like the universe was like, get to work on poems, Rosa. Like now is the time. And then, which was great because then the world slowed down for, the COVID or whatever. And so I was really grateful to have that time when things weren't crazy. But yeah, it's good.
Okay, let's talk about your book. I want to celebrate the title in
Oh,
particular, because I keep wanting to say all is in the telling, but it's so cool that you didn't do that.
yeah, no, it's just the telling. And I think maybe leaving it that way too leaves it a tiny bit open. Like, are we telling stories? Who are we telling? Like sometimes I think when we think about stories, we're thinking about projecting outwards, but really the truth is sometimes those stories, the ones that really belong to us are for us, like we're not telling them necessarily for some larger audience. It's really the thing you need to hear. I think that's valuable.
Hey, tell me how the book came to be.
I think like lots of poets, sometimes we just write and submit and you get on that treadmill of like sending poems out and, trying to get a reading here and there. And, that's the business of being a poet or maybe teaching classes, whatever that looks like. And you don't know that you have a book, like you just, the part of that treadmill is someday I'm going to organize this into a book, And a friend of mine, Rachel Beanland, actually sent me um, a thing that Keisha Kuipers was doing a manuscript workshop, and she was like, "You have to do this. You should totally go." And I didn't have a manuscript, and it was like 2 weeks to collect it all and then submit to try to get into the workshop. And then it turned out I had a book, and it wasn't exactly this book, but pretty close actually. The sections, like I wasn't 100% sure what to do with the poem play, but I thought that I wanted it to be the middle. And putting a book together is such a strange and wonderful thing, like now that I have done it, like I'm really excited. I'm writing new poems and I don't know if, sometimes you write a poem and you think, is the whole book going to be this poem? Like, and not necessarily in a giant long poem, but there's so often we have a lot more to say about the one poem that we have written on the topic, if that makes sense. And I love the idea that a book can be so many different things, but sometimes it's easy to get lost in that. And so I did get a tiny bit like turned around, like, what is this book supposed to be? But I was pretty lucky from start to finish because I had so many poems working in the same direction. It wasn't that hard to find not the through line, but the sort of the umbrella that's kind of holding it all. And for me, that's the Rilke stuff. I think a lot of us have to find the heat, like what, like you have when you're looking at 80 poems, and chances are maybe there's like five you are indifferent, but the rest of them, they belong in the book. You might not know the order, but they're supposed to be there. And so looking for the thing that felt electric or hot. And the thing that made me hot was the Rilke quote, which is all of the headings or whatever in the book are from that quote, and then the quote is in the book, once for each thing. And I kind of misread his quote. And so like I felt like he was saying it's just once. I don't know if that's happened to you, but like sometimes you're reading something and it's too personal, like your personal stuff is too close to the front for you to actually interpret it as not about you or not through the lens with which you are viewing that moment. And so for me, I was thinking about, childhood trauma and how, especially inside families, it's often never just the once. Half of us, all we do is wish it could just be the one time, but it's not. There's a repeat, and it's actually really painful. And so I was writing a lot of the work in this book in response to that idea that it isn't just the once. And so that's, I think, a little bit how the book kind of unfolded for me in a way, or maybe opened up is a better way of saying it. When I knew that those were going to be my sections, or at least I wanted those to be my sections. And then it made it possible for me to think about how time works in the book, and especially how time relates to trauma, all the things that we're carrying in our bodies. I think those are all really important and necessary concepts that I can't like get away from. So yeah, I wish I could say this book just like magically appeared, but I think again, lots of us, you have your book, like if you've been writing and trying to publish for a couple of years, chances are you have a book. You're sitting on it. You just need to put all the poems together and then see what the holes are, or see what, like puzzle pieces, what they make. And then that's so fun, because sometimes it's a surprise.
So you bring up Rilke's depiction of time and how you relate that to the section titles. I wonder if you could talk a bit about just like process-wise what writing about abstractions like time entails.
Well, I will say to start that I wish I had more science words. I don't like, like, it's one thing to be mad at math, but also to be mad at science is kind of a bummer. And so I wish that I was able to think about time in a way that intersects actual like facts, So I can only talk about it from a place of feeling, but because of epigenetics, we know that our bodies are repositories of more than just our lifetimes, that our experiences change and shape us, and sometimes we're carrying things that we don't even know, that we're carrying things that we'd like to put down, but we can't, because they're given to us by our ancestors or by, people we actually know. And or I'm talking about things that are both physical, but also emotional. And I think I do actually subscribe to the like paper doll person, idea of personhood, this idea that there are these different versions of me, that I can't escape. And at this point in my life, am glad not to escape, like I'm glad that I'm carrying all of this stuff. Well, not all of it, but a good percentage of it. Yeah, because because when you put all those dolls back together, it's me. It's just, this is what I equal. And I think time is fuzzy that way. I'm old enough to have like an adult nephew, somebody you know, who was a baby and I knew him, and now he's like 28 and I still know him. And so sometimes I look at his face and I just see his big chubby cheeks. I can't help it. And those two things are existing simultaneously. That's why I'm bringing it up, to say that he can be for me, himself at like, 1 and 7 and 11 and also 28. And when I'm interacting with him, I'm holding those versions. And so we do it for other people, but we're also, holding those versions of ourselves. And I think for me, a little bit, the Girl, the Color of poems allow some of those like versions or parts to have a voice in a way that was both fun and safe for me. I really, really enjoyed the freedom of messing around with a girl the color of. There's like, I can't remember if there's 10 or 11, and they're like the girl the color of a house on fire, or the girl the color of a cracked windshield. And the speakers of those poems get to speak from a different point of view than me as the speaker of some of these other poems as my like quote unquote adult self. And also I get to play with point of view in those poems. So sometimes they're third person and sometimes they're first person. And I really, really just liked the messiness of that. Like for me, it felt messy. I think for people who know more about grammar, it also might feel messy, but I'm a messy person. And it made sense to tell the story this way. And I really liked that for this book.
I love that series. It was so great. Every single time I was just like, damn, that's the perfect like color for this poem. So.
That's awesome. Yay!
In the notes, you mentioned that the middle section was originally part of a YA project. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, when I came back to writing, in part because I had like kids who were hanging out in middle grade books, all my kids are like a year and a half, 2 years apart, and so they pretty much we're all kind of doing the same thing. And for a little while, it was reading middle grade books. And so I kind of thought, and I do love, like some of my favorite books are books that I read or picked up when I was 11, 12, 13. And so I kind of wanted to write a story. And so I did actually. It's not very good, I don't think. Like it's kind of a mess. But it has these young characters, and the characters are kid versions of the adults who are in the poem play in my book. And so I was able to see it because I really like the story. The story is two sisters, one who's light enough to pass for white, and the mom comes up with this plan to steal swan feathers, which is, a fortune in bonnets. At the time, it's set, in post-Reconstruction Georgia on the line of the Okefenokee Swamp. And so in the novel that I write, it's, the character Belle as an 11-year-old trying to save her mom from hanging because the mom has made this choice that, the crime and finding the money is more important. Their lives are more important than hers to some extent. And in the book, in the poetry collection, it's a play, and it's the two sisters. It's just the two sisters, and it opens with them older than they ever are in the novel thing that I tried to write. A, because I really like their story, and B, because I think it's a story, that's worth telling, but that's important to me personally as somebody who's Black and biracial. And I say, for me, Black and biracial because in some spaces I am just Black, and in some spaces I am biracial. And the whole swaths of my life I was only Black, because I'm old. And that really wasn't a thing, but also what it means to be part of a biracial story, to be part of a passing narrative. I don't I don't think I've ever really like quote unquote passed for white, but I pass for all kinds of other things that are confusing for people. And that's sort of interesting. But I really wanted to be able to do the play, those poems as a play, because when you have poems on a page, we as readers know that we approach them, we put our reader hat on and we read the poems. And hopefully people are reading the poems out loud, and listening. But when you do that, you can maybe imagine the author as the speaker, or maybe you imagine yourself as the speaker. With a poem play, the idea is that you imagine it as a play, like you imagine a particular character. And I really liked the idea of embodiment, of giving, like literally giving bodies to these speakers that, but not me, that inviting the reader to give bodies to these speakers, inviting the reader to put these women on a stage, with nothing else, just their bodies. And if you imagine them like folding laundry or whatever it is, that's all super valid and sort of fantastic, like the way that novels work, like, I mean, we don't call novels like novel plays, but that is sort of what happens, we shape these things in our heads. But I don't know that we do that as much with traditional poems. And I really wanted folks to hear, their mom's voice or their sister's voice or a voice of that lady at church, the voice of somebody that they know that's, again, outside of themselves, to be able to have experience it as a play. Because I think there's ownership in those voices too, that's valuable and important in both authenticating the story, even though it's fictional. Like I don't really believe that, I mean, yes, I believe that like this is a fictional story, but the stories of passing are not fictional. The stories that we carry in our bodies that are valuable to us, are valuable for a reason. And so I think sort of centering them on a stage, underscores that importance in a way that's, I'm going to go with like valuable for us, like on an individual level. That isn't something that, that I can predict or I feel like or speak to, but I know that it matters. I don't know if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I think that is so freaking cool because I've never encountered that before. And since you do so much like collaborative work and like festivals and stuff, I think you could hire some actors and actually like play it out and do like a whole
We're
collaboration.
We're gonna do it in September.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah, it's really cool. And just like from a poet point of view, like I was trying to do it for my open for the book launch, like I thought that would be cool and something different, from because I don't ever read those poems out loud, like out at readings, because it always just feels a little schizophrenic, like I'll read one and then I'll read the other and like it doesn't make sense to me. And I found a friend who is an actor and has written plays, and she offered to direct it. And I was going to read one part and she was going to read the other. And we were just going to like do a dramatic reading. So like not even that much acting. And she, like, you haven't ever heard me read, but she was like, Rosa, a little less breathy and a little less sad. And I was like, oh, that's my whole wheelhouse. Like that's pretty much all I do as a reader. Not really, but it was really interesting because what she wanted is not what has worked for me in the past as a way of communicating the ideas of the poem. And I realized that part of it is about how we like literally like she was like move your hand, and like she brought her whole body to the table, whereas a poet, when I'm doing a reading, I do not bring my whole body. I mostly concentrate on breath. Like I do actually think about breath quite a bit, and making space and using breath as a way to make space for readers to have whatever experience with those words they can. Like I actually invite folks to close their eyes. I invite them to not have to, like, don't feel like you have to pay attention. Let the words just do whatever they're going to do, because I sometimes people need permission to be present, or to figure out how to be present. But for her, like, she was a little bossy, but she's like, why did you put that white space there? Like, why did you put that line break there? Like, if you didn't want me to use it, and da da da. And sometimes I blow past my own line breaks, like when I'm reading. It was really an interesting way to think about how poems work, because I don't know if I'm doing her justice, but she was very clear-eyed and got to the exact same place that I was trying to get to with the poem. Like we were not going in different places, but we were getting there in really different ways. Poets don't generally, like, quote unquote put on a voice, like, hey y'all, you know what I mean? We trust the reader to put that voice, to attach a voice, like if it requires it, like if you say ahead of time, this is in the voice of a 12-year-old or something, and then the person will proceed to read it in their actual voice. Do you know what I mean? Whereas with acting, you become that person in order for the folks in the audience to see or understand what it is that you're trying to convey. And those two goals, thinking about that has been really, really interesting. And I'm excited to see we're gonna do it in September, and with real actors, not me. Also, much respect to actual actors, because it's not easy to do that. But yeah, I'm very excited to see it come to life.
That sounds amazing. I can't wait to hear more about it.
Yeah.
On the subject of theater, you often draw in Shakespearean characters. What draws you to those characters in that particular tragedy?
Well, I grew up sort of liking, Shakespeare and having good experiences with like Much Ado About Nothing, or Othello for sure, and Hamlet. And I don't know if it's because like it was what was available, like maybe other people in their childhood had other books or something, but I really didn't have lots of access. And Othello, there's something really wonderful about a Black man alone in a white space, that speaks to me personally, as somebody who's often or has been often the only person of color in a space. I feel like in the last 5 years, that has really changed tremendously. But up until 5 years ago, I had never been in a workshop that was predominantly folks of color. It was always just, me and a bunch of older white ladies. Some of this was because I was in Vermont for 10 years and there's like almost zero people of color in Vermont, to be fair. But I think there's something about that. My high school experience was that way too. Not that I was the only person of color, but I felt very like isolated in small town Florida. And I grew up around my mom's family, which is predominantly white. And so I thought there was something about this Black man being acted on by all of these white characters. And also my dad is Black and my mom is white, so there's some obvious, opportunities for illusion there. But yeah, I did do theater, and I love like musical theater. Like people ask me for my playlist and I never give it to them because it's so like it's like Wicked and Chaperone and like I mean just it's really embarrassing. It's all songs you have to close your eyes when you sing. And so I do enjoy a little bit of the drama that Shakespeare brings, but also I think there's something in those stories in particular for me, as a person of color, reading that particular work as a tragedy. And in my book, my dad sort of shows up as a character. There's a poem that points to it, that he shows up as like Carl Anderson as Judas from Jesus Christ Superstar, that the way that sometimes younger people both put people on a pedestal, but also can't see the fullness of the adults in their lives. We only see sort of the characterization of their actions. And I think that was helpful for thinking about the like sort of the dad character in this book, but also thinking about my dad.
On a similar note as the Shakespeare, I love the myth and magical realism throughout, often right alongside very stark images of reality. Just process-wise, could you talk a bit about how you balance those things?
When you say that, are you thinking about like well, okay. All right. Okay. So everybody's brain works the way their brains work, and so for me, this is just sort of how my brain works. And I like I like believing that there's magic in the world, and I like balancing that light and dark because there is so much dark. And I think that like even okay, so even in the nature stuff, like I don't have a ton, I'm not an eco poet, but I feel like you can't write about Florida without writing about the landscape. And when you think about the landscape, it's hard not to imagine all of the blood, like that's and the violence that's just and some of it's, natural violence. There's hurricanes and flooding and all of the things that happen as a result of, natural disasters. But then there's also all of the man-made disasters and all of the ways that trees have been used. And to not think that that has some effect on them, it's hard not for my imagination to make those leaps. I don't know. It just sort of they sit side by side for me. And it's a way of processing, I think, too, that makes it tolerable in some way, not in a way that's like accepting, but I don't know. I think I want to say something about it, making it real for me personally, which is not the same as it might be. Like if you stood, like there are places where, you'll see a gigantic live oak, like one that you couldn't put your arms around. And it'll be this gorgeous, like living history, right? And then there'll be a plaque and it'll say, in the olden days, this was a site of lynchings, and you're just like, what the, fuck am I supposed to do with that? How do I hold this site? How do I take this whole thing in? And so other people, will go historical documents, and some folks might, put it in a form. I feel like people enjoy forms as a way of containing things that are uncontainable. But for me, I think story makes it in some ways even more true, which I think is strange, but because I come from storytellers, because I love stories and storytelling, I think some of those magical things slip in and are easier in story, and they make the other part feel magical too, like the horrible part, almost unreal. And I think there's an invitation to be grounded both in both. I'm not trying to re-traumatize anybody ever, like ever. And I think when writers don't offer trigger warnings, it's really disrespectful and, sort of self-indulgent in a way that is not cool because it makes some assumptions about who's in the audience, and we just can't ever do that. And so as a way of, I guess, keeping myself safe, I'm working also to keep others safe. And I think this is probably not really what you wanted to know, but that is, I think partially why, I'm braiding these things together. And I have to say also, it's fun for me. I like thinking about those girl the color of poems as creating a girl character who, in some ways, like thinking about like for color girls who've considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. I don't know if you know that work, but it's a choreo poem and like the first of its kind. And there's 6 women who represent all these different colors, and together they make this rainbow, but not literally, but sort of literally. And for me, my girls sort of, make one girl, and I like to think that she's kind of haunting this collection. The second to the last poem, which is really the last poem of the book, but the actual last poem is just really an actual hug, and that hug is for me and it's for my readers, like, yay, you made it, so did I. But the real last poem of the book is kind of haunted, by the girl from the color of poems, and she's not put to bed, like it's not resolved. That poem ends with her speaking, tell me a story, I don't care if it's true. And I think that is I always feel weird talking like people are real, but I think that is her truth, that it is the story that saves us. So yeah.
That is so beautiful. All throughout, I was just like, this book is so magical. Like, honestly, it just felt very, I don't know, just like fated. Like it was meant to find me at times.
Yay. No,
Yeah.
I think that's true. I think that some of us are like maybe faded, but we're really are each other's readers. Do you know? Like, I don't know if you've ever been in a workshop with somebody who's like, no, I got it. Like after, like you're talking and someone else was like, "Rah, rah, rah, that didn't make any sense. I couldn't see any of the images or whatever." And then someone else is like, I saw everything. And sometimes that's hard if the poem isn't working because they can fill in the gaps for you. But when it comes to a collection, when you find, like I love it when that happens because the work just gets more resonant somehow. And it isn't just because of this book, you know what I mean? It's that magical amalgamation of what you bring to the work, like what we each bring as readers. And I think that's just one of the coolest things about poetry. Like what one person is like, oh no, this is the central idea, or this is the most important part, or like whatever, because it's just so personal, and there's totally space for that in a poem. Especially at readings where you're listening, you don't have it in front of you, and so you're just taking in all these associations and connecting them as best you can, or following along as best you can. And then what that equals isn't always what the intent is, but it's something just for you, like I think I don't know, I just love that about poems. And so I'm glad, like, your questions were fantastic and pointed to some really cool things, and I was like, oh yay, like, because you never know what people are gonna find. And I do think that is one of the coolest things. Like, I didn't know, like, because you don't know when you're on like the line of having a book like get published and not get, like you don't have it out there yet. And I think the coolest thing is like it feels like it has its own little life, this book. Like it just goes out and goes on dates with people, and oftentimes, people love it and they fall in love, or fall in love with some one part or another, or the poem play doesn't make any sense to them, or whatever. But it's its own thing is really what I'm trying to say. It becomes its own thing. And it's because I'm not a visual artist. I think if there was a visual artist here, they'd be like, duh, that's how art works. But we don't think of poetry that way, I don't think. And I think the publication route doesn't encourage us to either, because someone's reading it online, and like far away from wherever you are. Or the people who are reading your poems are the readers at all the magazines and journals that you're submitting to, who you also don't get to have conversations with beyond submit again. There was something there we really liked, but you don't know what that is necessarily. And so the book lets you actually, have conversations with folks who have now something in common with you, which is your work. I don't know. It's kind of it's magical in its own way, and really fun. But mostly the part about like mostly the part about readers bringing what they bring, and just getting to have that experience, I think is really cool. And I bet that's happening with your work too. Like someone's out there like it's mattering to them in a way that you could not imagine, because I'm not you, like, and I think that's just so fantastic. And we know this as readers, because we do it all the time, but to be on the other end of it as the writer, getting to experience folks having these like really personal connection, like to your work, but not to you necessarily. Do you know what I mean? It's really cool. I met Ariel Marie, who won the Cave Canem Prize yeah, her book was amazing, like just so personal to me. Like all I felt, right? Like so personal. And I'm not usually shy about meeting people, but she was at the Witches and Warriors retreat with Franny Choi, and I didn't even talk to her like until the last day. She was kind of like, you're being weird. And I was like, but it wasn't, it's that feeling of, because the book brought up so many personal things for me, it was like she brought up personal things for me. Like she knows all my secrets, except she has no idea because we've never spoken in real life. I don't know if this is making any sense. I'm just saying that poetry brings stuff up, and it's just you and the book. Do you know what I mean? It's between you and the book or the collection of poems or however you want to think of it. And it's really cool. It is really cool. I'm really glad that this book found you. I'm glad it found you.
Thank you. I'm glad it found me too.
Yay.
Do you have a favorite poem in the book?
I saw that on your list of questions and I thought, do I have a favorite poem? I have poems that I like to read out loud, and I have poems that I never read out loud, but I love. I do really like the second to the last poem in the book, the I'm going back to my childhood where yelling makes sense, which is after the Danez, that title. Like I was doing a project with we were doing a reading together, and I was like, let's all do a poem like that. And then we'll ask the audience to, fill in that I'm going back to where, such and such makes sense. So we can make something together. And that poem kind of was at the end of like finishing this collection. And so it kind of all just came together. But I don't know that poem, like what it all means, what it equals, like what the sum of that poem equals for me, I don't think is actually on the page in a real way. But having the speaker, sort of me, the me of this book, get to be in conversation, or be present, really, just be present with the girl from The Girl, the Color of Poems, and then have that title about going back to my childhood where yelling makes sense. For me, that places me right in the intersection of being a daughter and being a mother. The yelling made no sense to me as a daughter. It was actually pretty terrible and like left some lasting echoes that are, whatever. But it's a place that I return to in my parenting that's not super great. You know what I mean? Like there are patterns and behaviors and ideas that we haven't sloughed off yet, that I haven't sloughed off yet. And so for me, that poem puts me right in conversation with those ideas, with this child self, with a longing, like so much longing to tell a better story. And so that's just like the personal doorway, you know what I mean, for me, of that poem. Again, I don't think all of that is even really intended to be in there. If it would be too messy. Like it's not really a great place to end the collection. But for me, it also, because it is kind of a doorway, it's where I want to go sort of next, like just thinking about like where I am, what I'm writing about right now is a little bit about being in that intersection of mothering teens, which for me, unfortunately, is bringing up lots of fear. Like I know this isn't a therapy session, but there's lots to be afraid of for me personally. And it's about who I am and what I carry and all of that. But also the world is just, and I sat next to a mom at a soccer game last night, and she was talking about, what she was talking about didn't make any sense to me, but I totally appreciate that it made total sense to her. Oh, she didn't want her son to, or there was like a class trip, they were trying to go to Mexico, and she was like, yeah, I don't want to go to Mexico. And I don't think she was being like racist. I think she was just being afraid. Do you know? Like, but she couldn't name the thing that she was afraid of. She was just afraid. And I recognize that. Like, like people are afraid right now. And also racist to be sure. But anyways, just being able to sit and acknowledge and think about writing from that place, is kind of exciting to me. And it also gives me a place to put some of this stuff. So that's good.
That's so great. Okay, just two more questions.
Okay. Sorry, I know I'm giving really long,
So
borderline convoluted answers. You're just like, I don't even, I'm sorry.
they're all so beautiful that I don't even mind.
Okay.
What do you most hope people take away from reading this book?
Oh, I think maybe two things. And you're catching me after my book launch, which felt like it was yesterday, but it was probably like 10 days now. It's just that I guess I want to say something about not being special, like myself. Like I think not having a book and being the kind of person who really was trying to get a book published. Like once I organized all my poems and put them into a thing, I thought that's the next step. Like you are on this writing path and you submit poems to journals, and I'm doing like all the things I'm supposed to do. And then the next thing is to get a book published. And I think sometimes we think that in that publication there will be some sort of validation, or that in that publication it'll mean something more about you or perhaps your work than is true before you have the book. And I think if I could have people take one idea, I'm like being careful because is this really the thing? But it is right now. It's that you already have all the stuff. You're already the person, and whatever dreams you have, whatever it is that you're striving toward, working toward, yes, of course, you should probably keep doing that. But you should also know that you are your own success, like you're carrying it into every room you go into, right? Like, but I mean, it's really easy to say once you got your thing that you were trying, like I appreciate that. But I also recognize that it's kind of true. Like, all is the telling. Like we're all already doing that work of telling our stories, especially the rooms I'm in, which are usually, filled with poets, or with people who want to be poets or trying to tell some kind of story. And I just, if people can see on the page, like I don't have a lot of formal, I mean, I am messing around with form in the book, but I don't have a lot of, I think I'm like using a high bone, and I can't remember if I'm doing anything else. I probably am. There's maybe like one other thing, or maybe there's not. I don't know. I'm trying to say I'm just a regular person, and all I did was make my dream come true, right? Which means anybody can do that. Like literally anybody. And you might be like, oh, I can't get an agent to return my email, or my queries have been blah, blah. Like that's a real thing. Or I've been rejected from like 100 book contests or whatever. And that's all true and real. And yet it's the telling, right? Every time you put your book or work or words out into the world, you don't know what's happening with them. And I think there's just value. Like there's just actually so much value in that. And capitalism is killing us with their stupid scarcity blah. Like that's a whole thing about why you have to query an agent, and why you have to submit, and why you have to pay to submit when you don't get really paid like for your book. Like, and if you hold that truth while you're submitting, then you know that it's all bullshit anyways. And so the truth is, whether it's bound and looks like this, or if it's a stack, of manuscript pages, or if it just exists on your computer, I don't know. I think you got to just keep putting it out there, but not in this way, but like you can't see it in this way. Do you know what I mean? Like in the heart talk way, which is to say, sharing your work, whatever that means, just keep sharing it. Because that's all I did. Like that's it. That's all I did is share my work. So yeah, that's all.
That's so lovely. Okay, finally, can you give our viewers a writing prompt based on All Is the Telling?
Yes. Okay. So the title poem, All Is the Telling. This is so fun. All Is the Telling, obviously, is a book about the stories we carry, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories that help us find our way back to ourselves, back to home, back to the ground that we can really stand on, or ground down in. And so thinking about that, what is the thing that you have to tell? And I think the poem starts with, do not doubt the brown and bony beginning, the girl I was. I think it's a fun invitation to think about a do not, or an I am not. This poem originally started with, I am not a storyteller, but do not doubt. And I think that's kind of a fun place. And then switch it and begin again. So you start in one direction and then, use those lines. Let me begin again. Once upon a time, or once this happened. And that's not a bad way to write yourself somewhere. Maybe. Or you can just use the prompt from the end of the book, which is, tell me a story. I don't care if it's true.
That's so great. This was so, so lovely. Thank you so much, Rosa.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And I am sorry. Like if it was like circular or too long-winded or whatever. Sometimes I have to find my way or whatever. So I appreciate your patience, but I really do appreciate your questions and your thoughtfulness and the obvious care that you took both in prepping for this and also just in spending time with the book. Like it's really awesome.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing more from you in the future.